The galaxy had laughed at humanity for centuries. To the other species of the cosmos, humans were weak, fragile creatures, barely worthy of consideration in the grand scheme of interstellar politics. The Vorthons, the dominant military force of the universe, saw Earth as nothing more than an insignificant speck, an easy conquest for their ever-expanding empire. And so, when the Vorthon war fleets arrived in Sol System, they did not expect resistance. They expected surrender. But humanity had learned. For generations, we had been underestimated, disregarded as little more than primitive creatures clawing at the stars. We knew what the rest of the galaxy thought of us, and we had prepared. The war began with devastating losses. Mars fell within a week. The lunar colonies were obliterated in days. The Vorthons bombarded Earth's defenses from orbit, shattering the planetary shield network like brittle glass. The United Earth Federation scrambled to mount a counterattack, but our forces were simply outmatched. Vorthon ships were faster, their weapons more advanced, their soldiers stronger. Humanity was on the verge of extinction. Then, the day came when the leaders of the UEF made the hardest choice in human history. Project Ares. For decades, humanity had been secretly developing the ultimate war machine, a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. While the Vorthons relied on brute strength, genetic superiority, and ancient battle doctrines, humanity had something else: ingenuity, desperation, the willingness to do whatever it took to survive. The Vorthons had laughed at us. Now, they would learn to fear us. The Ares prototype stood over 50 meters tall, a towering machine of metal and fury. Its armor was crafted from newly developed nanite-infused alloys, designed to withstand even the most devastating plasma weaponry. Its weapons were not mere energy cannons, but something far deadlier, a fusion of human engineering and stolen alien technology. But its most terrifying feature wasn't its armor, or its weapons, or even its size. It was the pilot. Commander Elias Kane had been chosen for one reason: he was willing to do what no one else would. The Ares program required a direct neural link, a complete fusion between man and machine. Once inside, Kane would become more than human. He would become war itself. The process was irreversible. The human mind wasn't designed to merge with a machine of such complexity. The moment Kane entered the cockpit, he would never be the same. His body would remain, but his mind would be forever entwined with the Ares system. And he accepted without hesitation. The day Ares was activated, the Vorthons learned the true nature of humanity. They had thought us weak. They had thought us fragile. They had thought us prey. They were wrong. The first battle was chaos. The Vorthon ground forces, having overrun Earth's defenses, were caught completely off guard when a single war machine tore through their ranks like a god of destruction. Plasma blasts that would have reduced tanks to slag barely scratched Ares' armor. Vorthon soldiers, bred for war, were annihilated before they could even react. But Kane didn't stop. He tore through their lines with ruthless precision, his every movement a calculated strike of fury and vengeance. The neural link between man and machine was perfect. Kane was no longer just a pilot. He was the machine. He felt its power, its strength, its hunger for battle. The Vorthons tried to adapt, deploying heavy artillery, air support, and orbital bombardments. It didn't matter. Nothing could stop Ares. And then came the moment that changed everything. A Vorthon dreadnought, a vessel capable of leveling entire continents, descended into Earth's atmosphere to finish the war. It had enough firepower to wipe out the last human strongholds in minutes. But Kane didn't hesitate. He activated Ares' experimental thrusters, launching himself into the sky with a force that shattered the ground beneath him. The dreadnought's cannons locked onto him, but he was already moving, already calculating, already hunting, and then, with a single, devastating strike, He tore through the warship's hull, ripping into its core like a vengeful spirit. The explosion that followed was seen from space. The message was clear. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was not weak. And we were just getting started. The explosion lit up the sky like a second sun, a blinding fireball consuming the Vorthon dreadnought. The shockwave rippled through the atmosphere, sending debris raining down over the smoldering ruins of Earth's last defenses. Silence followed. A moment of stillness, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then came the screams. Not human screams, but Vorthon. Their soldiers, their officers, their warlords, watching from their command centers, their warships, their high and mighty thrones in the depths of space, realized what had just happened. A single human, a single machine, and an entire dreadnought reduced to nothing. Ares fell from the sky, its scorched armor trailing smoke, and crashed into the ruins of what had once been New London. The impact sent a massive shockwave through the streets, but Kane barely felt it. He was still linked, still alive, his mind burning with the fire of battle. His body was exhausted, but Ares' systems kept him awake, pumping him full of adrenaline, forcing him to stay alert. Because the battle wasn't over. The Vorthon ground forces were still there, their invasion still in progress. And now they had a choice. Fight or flee. For the first time in history, the Vorthons chose the latter. Across every occupied city, their troops abandoned their positions. Their war machines turned and ran. Officers shouted commands in their guttural, snarling language, ordering emergency extractions, calling for immediate evacuations. The mighty conquerors of the galaxy, the self-proclaimed supreme warriors, were running from a single machine, from a single human. Kane gritted his teeth as he forced Ares back onto its feet. The neural link pulsed through his brain, thoughts merging with code, instincts translating into mechanical motion. His vision flickered, systems struggling to maintain full functionality. The damage from the fight was severe, but he didn't care. He had a war to finish. "Command, this is Kane," he growled through the comms, his voice raw. "Status report." Static. Then a weak signal came through. "Holy shit, Kane, you actually did it." It was General Vasquez, his tone somewhere between disbelief and sheer awe. "The bastards are running." Kane exhaled, finally allowing himself a moment to process it. The Vorthons, the species that had razed Mars, that had shattered Earth's fleets, that had declared humanity unworthy of existence, were fleeing. But Kane knew better than to celebrate too soon. "They'll be back," he muttered, scanning the battlefield. "They don't take defeat lightly." "Maybe, but they won't forget today," Vasquez replied. "And they sure as hell won't forget you." The word sent a strange chill through Kane's spine. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He wasn't even just a man. He was something else now, something the galaxy would fear. He turned his gaze skyward, where the remnants of the Vorthon fleet were retreating, their warships burning trails through the atmosphere as they jumped to hyperspace. They had come expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they had found something else. Humanity had built the ultimate war machine, and Kane had become its heart. But deep down, he knew the war wasn't over. This was only the beginning, because the Vorthons would return. And next time, humanity would be ready. Kane sat in the cockpit of Ares, his hand still gripping the neural controls even though the battle was over. His mind was clouded, his thoughts entangled with the machine's systems. The link between them was growing stronger, stronger than he had ever expected. He could still feel the heat of the explosions, the screams of retreating Vorthons, the impact of his strikes against their war machines. But most of all, he could feel something else. The hunger. Ares wasn't just a weapon, it was something more. It had been designed as the pinnacle of human warfare, but now, Kane realized, it had a will of its own. It wanted to fight. It wanted to destroy. And through the neural link, that hunger bled into him. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. "Command, what's our status?" he asked. General Vasquez's voice crackled through the comms. "We're holding, but barely. The Vorthans have retreated from most of their occupied zones, but some of their ground forces are still resisting. We need to clear them out before they regroup." Kane clenched his jaw. The Vorthans weren't running because they were afraid. They were retreating to reassess, to strategize. This was a setback for them, not a defeat. They would be back, and next time they wouldn't underestimate humanity. "How long until reinforcements arrive?" Kane asked. There was a pause. Then Vasquez sighed. "That's the thing, Kane. We don't have any reinforcements. Earth's defense fleets are gone. The colonies are either destroyed or occupied. We're on our own." Kane felt his stomach sink. The battle might have been won, but the war was still far from over. Ares' systems whirred, detecting new movement. Kane's vision blurred slightly as the neural link surged again, flashing data across his mind. He could see them. Vorthon stragglers, moving through the ruins of New London, setting up fortifications, preparing for a counterattack. They weren't giving up. They were digging in. He exhaled slowly, gripping the controls tighter. "Then we finish this. Kane, you need to rest." "No time," Kane interrupted. His voice was colder than he expected. "Send me their coordinates. I'll handle it." Vasquez hesitated. "You sure you're okay?" Kane didn't answer. He didn't need to. The hunger in his mind was growing. The machine wanted to fight. And deep down, so did he. With a slow, almost mechanical movement, he activated Ares' systems and marched toward the battlefield once more. Kane moved through the ruins of New London, Ares' massive frame casting an eerie shadow over the shattered cityscape. Skyscrapers stood as broken skeletons, their glass and steel remains scattered across streets that had once been alive with human voices. Now, the only sounds were the distant echoes of battle, the sporadic bursts of gunfire, the low hum of Vorthon hovercrafts maneuvering through the wreckage. Ares fed him information, its sensors scanning every corner of the battlefield. Kane saw the data as if it were an extension of his own senses. The neural link was becoming seamless now. His thoughts were Ares' commands, his instincts transformed into precise calculations. The machine no longer felt like something he was piloting. It felt like a second body, and it wanted blood. Vorthon forces had taken up defensive positions along what used to be the Thames River. Their soldiers, towering reptilian humanoids clad in shimmering black armor, moved with military efficiency, setting up plasma turrets and deploying shielding units. They knew Ares was coming. They were preparing for a last stand. Kane could hear them. Not through the comms, not through any audio sensors. He could feel them. Their fear, their desperation. The once invincible warriors of the galaxy, reduced to prey. He activated his weapons. The shoulder-mounted plasma cannons hummed to life, their barrels glowing with barely contained energy. His right arm shifted, reshaping into the experimental railgun, an Earth-designed weapon capable of firing magnetically accelerated tungsten slugs at hypersonic speeds. The left arm activated a monomolecular blade, vibrating at a frequency that could slice through Vorthon armor like butter. The machine was ready, and so was he. A voice crackled through his comms. "Kane, wait! We can negotiate surrender." But it was too late. Ares surged forward, launching itself into the fray like an unstoppable force. The Vorthons opened fire, plasma bolts streaking through the air, impacting Ares' armor with scorching bursts of light. Kane barely registered it. The machine's shields absorbed the damage, dispersing the energy harmlessly. He moved with terrifying speed, closing the distance in seconds. His railgun fired. A sonic boom shattered windows for miles as a tungsten slug ripped through the battlefield. A Vorthon transport exploded in a spray of fire and twisted metal, the shockwave knocking enemy soldiers off their feet. Kane didn't stop. He reached the front line and activated the blade. The first Vorthon barely had time to react before it was bisected, its massive form collapsing in two smoldering halves. The others roared, charging with energy lances and shock rifles, but Kane was faster. Ares moved like a demon of war, weaving through enemy fire with inhuman precision. Plasma cannons tore through enemy ranks, incinerating squads before they could even scream. The blade flashed, severing limbs, carving through armored vehicles like paper. Kane felt nothing. No hesitation. No remorse. Only the battle. One of the Vorthon commanders barked an order, and a massive war mech emerged from behind the rubble, a towering behemoth nearly as large as Ares. Its weapons locked onto him, and in an instant it fired a blast of concentrated energy. Kane barely dodged. The ground where he had stood melted into molten slag. He turned, raising his railgun, but the Vorthon mech was already charging, its enormous hammer-like weapon swinging down with enough force to level a building. Ares' systems reacted before Kane even thought. He boosted to the side, the neural link amplifying his reflexes. The hammer missed by inches, embedding itself into the ruined pavement with a deafening crash. Kane saw his opening. He lunged. The monomolecular blade plunged deep into the enemy mech's torso, piercing its power core. Sparks and flames erupted from the wound as the Vorthon pilot inside screeched in rage. Kane twisted the blade and yanked it free, then fired his railgun point blank. The mech detonated, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Kane barely noticed. He was already moving to the next target. The remaining Vorthons panicked. Their formation broke. Some tried to flee, others fired blindly in a last act of defiance. It didn't matter. Ares cut them down, one by one. Minutes later, it was over. The battlefield was silent. The Vorthon stronghold had been annihilated. Their bodies lay in smoldering heaps, their machines reduced to scrap. Kane stood amidst the carnage, his breath ragged, his pulse slow. Ares' systems hummed, awaiting his next command. But there was nothing left to fight. He exhaled, his hands trembling slightly. The neural link pulsed again, and for a brief moment he felt something unsettling. Satisfaction. Not his own. Ares. The machine had enjoyed this. Kane clenched his fists. He could still feel the hunger inside him, growing stronger with every battle. The line between man and machine was blurring, and he wasn't sure if he could stop it. The comms crackled again. General Vasquez's voice was quiet. "Kane, what the hell have we created?" Kane didn't have an answer. He turned his gaze to the sky. The Vorthons had retreated for now, but they would return. Stronger. More prepared. And when they did, he wasn't sure if he'd still be human enough to care. Kane sat in the cockpit, his breathing heavy, his hands still gripping the neural controls. The battle was over. The last Vorthon stronghold had been reduced to ruins, their forces annihilated. Ares stood in the center of it all, its armor scorched, its blade dripping with molten metal. But Kane wasn't relieved. The silence was deafening. The battlefield stretched before him like a graveyard, smoke curling into the sky, the stench of burning flesh and metal thick in the air. His mind should have been screaming at him, at the slaughter, at the brutality of what he had done. Instead, all he felt was clarity. The neural link hummed softly in his mind, whispering to him. It had been efficient, flawless, perfect. Ares had not just won the battle, it had dominated it. Kane exhaled slowly, trying to shake the feeling. He reached up, fingers twitching slightly as he attempted to disengage from the neural link. The machine resisted. Just for a second. Then, the cockpit hissed open, and the world outside rushed in. Cold air, laced with the acrid scent of war, flooded his senses. His muscles ached as he pulled himself from the seat, stepping onto Ares' broad shoulder. Below, UEF soldiers were moving cautiously through the wreckage, their faces a mix of awe and unease. Some of them barely looked at him. Others couldn't stop staring. Kane had seen that look before. Fear. He dropped down from Ares, his boots hitting the charred pavement. The moment his feet touched the ground, the soldiers stiffened, stepping back slightly. He wasn't sure if they were giving him space out of respect, or if they were afraid to get too close. He couldn't blame them. A lieutenant approached, his uniform still covered in soot from the battle. "Commander Kane, sir." He hesitated, swallowing hard. The Vorthons are retreating across the entire planet. "We've won." Kane nodded, glancing at the sky. The Vorthon fleet had mostly vanished into hyperspace. Only a few wrecks remained in low orbit, silent reminders that even the galaxy's most feared warriors could bleed. But he knew it wasn't over. Not really. "How many casualties?" Kane asked. The lieutenant hesitated. "On our side? High. We lost nearly 70% of our ground forces before you arrived. Civilians." He trailed off, shaking his head. "We don't have the numbers yet." Kane closed his eyes. 70%. The Vorthons had come to wipe humanity from existence. They had come to make an example of Earth, to show the rest of the galaxy that resistance was futile, and they had nearly succeeded. If Ares hadn't been activated. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. General Vasquez's voice came through his earpiece. "Kane, get back to HQ now!" There was something in his tone. Urgency. No, more than that. Concern. Kane turned away from the battlefield and climbed back into Ares. The neural link reactivated the moment he sat down, wrapping around his mind like a second skin. He barely had to think before Ares moved, its massive frame striding toward the last standing human stronghold. Even as he walked, he felt it again. That whisper in his mind, that hunger. Ares had tasted war, and it wanted more. 40 minutes later, Kane stepped into the war room of the UEF Underground Command Center. The air was thick with tension. Officers gathered around flickering holographic displays, their faces pale. Vasquez stood at the center of it all, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "What's going on?" Kane asked. The general exhaled through his nose. "We intercepted a transmission from the Vorthon High Command." Kane frowned. "They're calling for reinforcements, aren't they?" Vasquez shook his head. "Number, they're doing something worse." He tapped a console, and the room filled with the deep, guttural voice of a Vorthon warlord. The translation system processed it in real time, the words clear, cold, and dripping with rage. "Earth was supposed to be a lesson. Instead, it has become an infection. This Ares must be purged from existence. Humanity must be erased before it spreads further." The recording cut off. Silence hung in the air like a death sentence. Kane exhaled. "They're scared." Vasquez nodded. "They are, and that makes them dangerous." Another officer spoke up. "The Vorthons don't just want revenge. They want to ensure humanity never becomes a threat again. We've confirmed reports that their empire is mobilizing their full war machine." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Full war machine?" Vasquez met his gaze. "Every fleet, every soldier, every weapon they have. They're not coming to conquer anymore." He paused. "They're coming to exterminate us." The room was deathly silent. Kane felt the neural link pulsing faintly in the back of his skull. Ares' systems were responding, reading his thoughts, anticipating his next move. The machine wasn't afraid. If anything, it was ready. Kane clenched his fists. They want a war? His voice was cold. Then let's give them one. The war room erupted into a chaotic mix of shouting and hurried discussions. Officers scrambled to relay orders, analysts pored over data streams, and Vasquez stood in the center of it all, his face grim. The weight of the entire species' survival pressed down on the room like a crushing force. Kane, however, felt something else. Excitement. The neural link pulsed in the back of his skull, feeding him information faster than his mind could fully process. He could feel Ares waiting for him, its systems primed, its weapons ready. The machine had no fear, no hesitation. It only had a purpose. And so did he. Vasquez turned toward him. Kane, we need a plan, and we need it now. Kane crossed his arms. How long until the Vorthon fleet arrives? A young lieutenant, her face pale, checked a data pad. Based on their last known trajectory, we estimate... She hesitated. 72 hours. 3 days. Kane's jaw tightened. Not nearly enough time. The last battle had cost humanity dearly. Most of Earth's defenses were in ruins. The fleet was decimated. What little remained of the UEF military was scattered across the planet, barely holding together. They weren't just outnumbered. They were outgunned, outmatched, and running out of time. Vasquez exhaled. We can't hold out against the full weight of the Vorthon Empire. Not like this. We don't have to, Kane said. His voice was steady, cold. We don't fight them head-on. We take the fight to them. The room fell silent. Vasquez frowned. Explain. Kane stepped forward, his mind already racing through calculations, simulations, probabilities. Ares was feeding him ideas, refining them, optimizing them. The war machine wasn't just a weapon. It was a strategist. And now, so was he. They expect us to wait here and die, Kane said. They expect to show up with their armada, glass the planet, and erase us from history. We can't let that happen. He turned toward the holotable, activating a projection of the solar system. They'll enter through standard jump lanes near Jupiter. That gives us a window. A small one, but enough? Vasquez folded his arms. Enough for what? Kane met his eyes. To strike first. A murmur spread through the officers. Vasquez narrowed his gaze. You're talking about an offensive operation? We barely have anything left to defend ourselves, and you want to take the fight to them? Yes, Kane said without hesitation. We don't have the numbers, but we have something they don't. Ingenuity. They think like conquerors. We think like survivors. That means we fight dirty. He zoomed in on Jupiter's orbit. We still have a few automated mining stations in the outer belt. We can rig them with explosives, turn them into a minefield. The lieutenant's eyes widened. You want to ambush them? Kane nodded. Not just ambush, devastate. We bait them into the minefield, cripple their lead ships, and cut through their ranks before they know what's happening. Vasquez frowned. That still leaves thousands of enemy warships. What then? Kane took a slow breath. This was the part that made even him hesitate. We use Ares. The room fell silent again. Vasquez shook his head. Kane, one war machine, no matter how advanced, can't turn the tide against an entire armada. Kane's hands clenched at his sides. Maybe not. But it can buy us time. If I launch a direct assault on their flagship, I can draw their attention. They see Ares as the biggest threat now. They'll focus everything on stopping me. Vasquez's expression hardened. That's a suicide mission. Kane didn't flinch. Not if I win. The general studied him for a long moment. Kane could see the calculations in his mind, the weighing of options, the brutal reality of their situation. Then, finally, Vasquez sighed. "You really think this can work?" Kane's neural link pulsed again. Ares whispered in his mind, feeding him certainty. "Yes," he said. Vasquez exhaled. "Then let's get to work." For the next 48 hours, the remnants of the UEF worked relentlessly. Mining drones were repurposed into floating bombs, orbiting around Jupiter's gravity well like a deadly net. The last remaining warships, only a handful compared to what Earth once had, were refitted for one last stand. And Ares was enhanced. Technicians worked around the clock, installing experimental weapon systems, reinforcing its armor, pushing the war machine beyond its original limits. The neural link was strengthened, the synchronization between man and machine becoming something deeper, something more complete. Kane barely slept. He could feel Ares inside his mind now, even when he wasn't in the cockpit. The line between where he ended and the machine began was blurring, and he wasn't sure he wanted to stop it. 72 hours later, the sky burned. The Vorthon fleet arrived in perfect formation, their warships emerging from hyperspace like an unstoppable tidal wave. Thousands of vessels, each one capable of wiping out cities with a single barrage, darkened the void above Jupiter. Their confidence was absolute, their victory inevitable until the mines detonated. Fire erupted across the fleet as dozens of Vorthon ships were torn apart in an instant. Explosions rippled through their ranks, breaking formation, sowing chaos, and in the middle of the confusion, Ares launched. Kane activated the thrusters, and the war machine roared into the fray. The first Vorthon cruiser came into view, its turrets swiveling toward him. Kane didn't give them a chance. Ari's railgun fired, and the slug punched through the ship's hull like paper. The explosion engulfed its neighboring vessels, sending debris scattering into the void. Then the rest of the fleet reacted. Torpedoes, plasma cannons, energy beams, all locked onto Ares, converging with deadly precision. But Kane was already moving. He weaved through the chaos, dodging fire, cutting through enemy ships with ruthless efficiency. He was no longer just a soldier, no longer just a man. He was war itself. But as he tore through the fleet, something unexpected happened. Ares' neural link surged, stronger than ever. Kane gasped as his mind was flooded with data, calculations, something deeper. And then, a voice. Not human, not Vorthon. "You are not ready." Kane's breath caught. A presence, something vast, ancient, watching from the shadows of the cosmos. And it wasn't Vorthon. Before he could react, something in the void moved. And the real war began. Kane's breath hitched as the neural link pulsed violently, overwhelming his senses with a flood of foreign data. Ares trembled beneath him, not from damage, not from the Vorthon's attacks, but from something else. Something unseen, something watching. The voice echoed again, reverberating through his skull like a whisper from the void itself. "You are not ready." For the first time since the war had begun, Kane felt something alien claw at his mind. Not fear, dread. Then, the universe shifted. Beyond the chaos of the battlefield, beyond the burning wreckage of Vorthon warships, space itself seemed to ripple, distort. The stars bent unnaturally, like reflections on a shattered mirror. And then, they appeared. Massive, monolithic shapes materialized from nothingness. Darker than the void, their surfaces absorbed all light, their forms twisting in ways that made no sense. Ships, beings, machines? Kane couldn't tell, but the Vorthons recognized them, and they panicked. The mighty conquerors of the galaxy, the same species that had come to wipe out humanity, were now scrambling in desperation. Warships that had been firing relentlessly at Earth's last defenses suddenly cut engines and turned to flee. Flee. The comms exploded with garbled Vorthon transmissions, their guttural language layered with a primal terror Kane had never heard from them before. One word kept repeating in the transmissions, over and over. Unbidden. Kane didn't have time to process. One of the dark shapes moved, faster than anything he had ever seen, faster than physics should allow. A Vorthon dreadnought, one of their most powerful ships, was caught in its wake. And then it was gone. Not destroyed, not shattered into debris, simply erased, as if it had never existed at all. Kane's heart pounded. Ares' sensors struggled to make sense of what was happening, but every attempt at scanning the intruders resulted in nothing but static. The Vorthons had come to exterminate humanity, and now they were the ones being hunted. General Vasquez's voice burst through the comms. "Kane! What the hell is that?" Kane barely found his voice. "I don't know." Another ripple. Another Vorthon ship vanished, then another, and another. The once mighty fleet that had threatened to wipe out Earth was being unmade before his eyes. And yet, despite the sheer devastation unfolding, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that whatever these things were, they hadn't come for the Vorthons. They had come for him. For Ares. The neural link pulsed violently again. Kane gritted his teeth, clutching his head as something pushed against his mind. Not an attack, not a message, a test, a voice. Not human, not machine, but something vast. "Show us." Kane barely had time to react before the nearest dark shape turned toward him and attacked. Ares' systems screamed warnings as something invisible, ripped toward him at impossible speed. Kane's instincts took over, thrusters firing as he barely dodged. Where he had been an instant ago, space itself seemed to fold in on itself, as if reality had tried to swallow him whole. Kane gritted his teeth. "All right, you son of a bitch." His hands gripped the controls. "Let's see what you've got." He activated the railgun. The barrel hummed with energy as a tungsten slug launched at hypersonic speed and passed right through the entity. The projectile didn't impact, didn't explode, didn't exist anymore. Kane's blood ran cold. "What the hell?" The entity moved. Another ripple, another impossible lunge. Kane barely managed to dodge again, his mind working overtime. Every strategy, every combat experience, every instinct screamed at him. This isn't a battle you can win. But Ares' neural link told a different story. The war machine wasn't afraid. It understood something Kane didn't. And then, Kane felt his own mind shift. The link deepened, his vision blurred, his senses expanded, and suddenly, he saw. Not just with his eyes, but with Ares' perception. The entities weren't invincible. They weren't untouchable. They existed on a different frequency, a different plane, but that didn't mean they couldn't be fought. And Ares had already adapted. Kane smirked. "All right, round 2. He flipped a switch, activating an experimental function. Ares' systems recalibrated, energy levels shifting, the entire machine humming with newfound resonance. He aimed, and this time, when he fired, the dark entity screamed. Darkness. Kane floated in an abyss beyond time, beyond space, beyond understanding. The neural link pulsed erratically, his mind teetering on the edge of something vast, something infinite. Ares was silent. For the first time since their fusion, Kane couldn't feel the machine. It was still there. He could sense its presence, a distant hum at the edge of his consciousness. But it was like staring into the void, reaching for something just beyond his grasp. And then, the voice returned. "You are not ready," Kane clenched his fists. "What are you?" His voice sounded distant, like it was being pulled away, lost in the gravity of something enormous. The presence pulsed. It wasn't just speaking to him. It was inside him, unraveling his thoughts, peeling apart his mind layer by layer. "You are the first." The blackness around him shifted, swirling with impossible shapes, fragments of battlefields, memories of war, echoes of destruction. He saw Earth burning, the Vorthans fleeing, the unbidden tearing through the cosmos like a storm without end. "The first to hear us." Kane gritted his teeth. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stand, if standing was even possible in this nothingness. "Why me?" A ripple in the void, a pulse of knowledge, too much to comprehend, too vast to grasp. Then images, Ares, but not just Ares, thousands, no, millions, a vast, endless army of war machines, each one like his, yet different, each one piloted by something more. Something changed, a vision of what could be or what would be. Kane's breath caught in his throat. "You want an army? You are the beginning." A realization clawed its way into his mind. The unbidden weren't invaders. They weren't a species, or an empire, or even a force of destruction. They were a correction, a force that emerged only when civilizations reached a threshold, when they touched something they weren't supposed to. Humanity had built Ares to fight the Vorthans, but in doing so, they had created something more, something dangerous, something that had to be tested. Kane's pulse pounded in his ears. "And if I fail?" Silence. Then, "Humanity will end." Kane exhaled sharply, his hands steadied, his fear, his uncertainty, his hesitation. He buried it all. His species was on the brink of extinction. Earth was in ruins. The Vorthans would return. And now, something far worse had taken notice. But Kane had never been the kind of man to run. He had been underestimated before. Humanity had been mocked before. And yet, here he stood. Here they stood. He clenched his fists. "Then I guess I don't have a choice." A pause. Then, for the first time, the voice changed. Not distant, not unknowable. Something closer, something satisfied. "Good." The void shattered. Kane gasped as reality snapped back into existence. Ares rebooted in an instant, the neural link surging back into his mind like a tidal wave. Warnings flashed across his vision, damage reports, energy fluctuations. And yet, he was alive. The battlefield was empty. The unbidden were gone. The Vorthan fleet had fled. Earth was still there, scarred, broken, but alive. Kane exhaled, his hands shaking. Vasquez's voice burst through the comms. "Kane, do you read me? What the hell just happened?" Kane swallowed. How could he even begin to explain? He steadied himself, looked toward the void, toward the stars. "They're watching," he said quietly. A long silence. Then Vasquez exhaled. "Who?" Kane's grip on the controls tightened. "The ones who decide if we survive." Another pause. Then, "Are they coming back?" Kane's eyes narrowed. "They don't have to." Because now, humanity knew they existed. And Ares was just the beginning. The war wasn't over, it had just evolved.